Back to the modern day book by Reverend Susan MeeLing. That's me. Going to page 45, irony of the President of the United States of America during this time is President 45, Donald J. Trump, and Vice President Pence. But going back to reading and commentary of, starting on page 45, if those people, also known as cherubim ones, had hypothetically reached out to and or contacted any of my ex or former relationships who had already moved on with their lives after already having been a part of problems in reference to my children and I were facing, but had lied to the courts in reference to the FISA, FOIA, and other legal requests, did those cherubim ones care more about their selfish desires, or did they care about causing chaos to those people of the compassionate, honorable, and righteous ones, as well as their loved ones instead, rather than doing better and being better? If those people, or cherubim ones, hypothetically had done such in lying to the United States of America's law enforcement, could they have done better through helping my children and I instead of causing more problems for such? In turn, also did those people, also known as cherubim ones, think about how I had not put their names into the first two books, but had, or any of the books until recently, but had outed themselves with their legal inquiries, as well as what are the repairs and remedies to repay for those choices? If, hypothetically, those people, also known as cherubim ones, had not believed me when in person as well as writing stuff online, in the discussion of various aspects of my life experiences and or what I had been told, and instead of believing me, knowing that I cannot tell a lie, whether it was before my head injury or after my head injury, definitely after, and instead chose to cause more problems when I knew them before contacting legal authorities for FISA or FOIA or any other court system, do those people, also known as cherubim, understand at minimum there are judicial actions of which they are now subject to repaying to the United States of America's government, as well as rectifying what was done wrongly to my children and I? If so, do those people, or cherubim ones, realize the costs of purchasing the books that I initially wrote from 2004 to 2016 would have cost them far less in money if my names were slandered because of those people, or cherubim ones? What are the legal ramifications for their actions and choices? If such occurred hypothetically to the United States of America's government as well as businesses, what are the ramifications to all involved because of those people, also known as cherubim ones, and their choices? In reference to recommendations for the legalities in regards to medication tampering, if there hypothetically had been preset laws as well as it occurred, then my recommendation is a tripling of the legal penalties for such in regards to targeting me, obviously, as well as my children and my Medal of Honor art project, and in turn the targeting of my children because of my being the only one to take care of them, because their father, my dead ex-husband, hence that word dead, in reference to my ex-husband, I was the only one. My biological parents claimed they moved to the state of Texas to help me with my children. They did not. In reference to if there had not been any preset laws up until this point in time because of prior medication bottle tampering not having been caught earlier by the people, or cherubim ones, prior, then I make these legal recommendations for the courts to decide. For each individual act to tamper with my medications or any medications because of my disabilities and thinking, though not having a medical license as a civilian, they could get away with such. For example, Erica on FetLife in 2012 went by the name Discordia, That female, who had been arrested and convicted of stealing personal property of gnome statues in the San Antonio, Texas area, that was in 2011. She went to jail for 3 days. Had admitted to, along with Alicia, her submissive at the time, and I think her fiance, meaning Erica, or Discordia's fiance's name was Brian, who is in the Air Force, of which both admitted to tampering with my Palm Sunday 2000 medical effects in Erica's parents' garage in 2012 as well as 2011. My recommendation is 2 years in prison per each medication packaging tampering in reference to such, but also in reference to the other aspects questioned and stated per count of. If, unlike now in 2020, of which I do not have my children to take care of as far as my son and my daughter, but when I did have my children or one child to take care of, and thus the endangerment of a minor at those times, per account of my recommendation is double per child added to the penalties of one against just me. However, again, if the want is to reduce the time in prison, I refer to the recommendation of the plasma, blood, and organ donations. In regards to if anyone whom I had scuba dove with in Lake Travis in Austin, Texas, and or Cozumel, Mexico, and or Boca Raton, Florida, as well as the other areas in Terrell, Texas, and Huntsville, Texas, but mainly because of the depth levels in the ones that I named as far as Austin, Cozumel, and Boca Raton areas, as well as the Vandenberg. Needed assistance, and due to the targeting as well as the hacking had caused scuba divers to not be able to contact me to ask for assistance. If there was a death, I believe there is an equivalent of charges for manslaughter as the intent to deny those scuba divers the right to get assistance, as well as the medical professionals from being able to ask questions of me from 2009 through to this current time of 2020 of the current year. Those individuals, also known as cherubim ones, could have prevented the assistance given to those scuba divers and medical professionals sooner, which includes their families and friends who could have been helped and prevented from dealing with such, and in turn such civil penalties on top of the prior prison sentences and recommendations. If there was no death but there was bodily injury, then civil penalties of the average per the type of damages to the body per person, as well as any prison sentence for such crimes known for when on land. Personal recommendation. Going on to the next number. If the people I once knew who would be considered as cherubim ones had hypothetically contacted a lawyer, spent the money and time on such endeavors, as well as having lied to the individuals within the courts of law, was it more or less expensive and more or less time-consuming to simply have told the truth, or to have continued with their lies to each of the officials they were in contact with? How much time, money, and resources of those individuals, as well as the United States of America's government, did those people, also known as cherubim ones, waste and abuse knowing better about the laws than I had understood at any point in time or comprehend before now or now? Did they, as in those cherubim ones, or do those cherubim ones think the United States of America's government is not going to be, nor was interested in being refunded as much of and as soon as possible to ensure the raising of taxes doesn't incur for those bills they cause to other people, of the righteous, compassionate, and honorable ones? If those people, also known as cherubim ones, had hypothetically banded together and included themselves with someone, for example, Cactus Jack, aka Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., and the 151 Road Warriors, does that in turn label those people as domestic terrorists, as I thought it had, and or assisting domestic terrorist behaviors on the United States of America's soil, aka or also known as the homeland, because of what Cactus Jack, also known as Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., had done during the Fiesta event in San Antonio, Texas, and they, as in the cherubim ones, chose to interact with the other cherubim ones, and organizing by their own free will and choice, would that such make them considered as domestic terrorists? I think so. Can't be the only one. Sounded like terrorism to me back then. I said before to multiple people, including him, meaning Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., aka, or also known as Cactus Jack, that, and including my dead ex-husband when he was alive, the types of choices Cactus Jack, also known as Jeffrey Kirkendall Jr., made in those times that he had talked about with the 151 Road Warriors incident had sounded like terrorism to me. Though, maybe because of what was going on at that time, that may not have made sense to some, and or maybe there were not definitive definitions of, which I found out later when I did a research in 2019. I found out there's no definition of spiritual terrorism or domestic terrorism, so, hence this book. Maybe even now there are not, or at minimum, aspects of penalties to include which could be considered as more humane than a firing squad in reference to the laws within the UCMJ, though I still support such. Maybe if the words as they come together as I write will be of more assistance to prevent further activities thereof from occurring to the innocent civilians, the compassionate, honorable, and righteous ones, throughout, as well as the military and law enforcement, which are of that, of the United States of America for the short term as well as the long term, though I admit I could just be hopeful thinking. In turn, my recommendations are as follows. In regards to someone using lawyers to go through FOIA and FISA and other courts and choosing to lie to the United States of America's government, my recommendation is a penalty fee of all owned property being forfeited to the United States of America's government, and such includes if the lawyers hired were in knowledge of their client purposefully lying to the United States of America's governmental officials, of up to 4/5 of everything owned and in their names. Of what is collected, then, a set monetary worth to the victims outside of the FISA FOIA courts and like of 1/5 to prevent the need to raise taxes for such abuses of the court system. As a lawyer knows, they cannot coerce their clients to lie, and in turn they are not supposed to themselves lie to the courts of the United States of America, as such penalties are fair for all. If there had been a spouse and or relationship partner, and I mixed up the numbers, the 4/5 should be to the victim and then 1/5 to the lawyers. My mistake on that. I do have issues with numbers. Don't deny that. I did go from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math, so. If there had been a spouse and or relationship partner and or children involved with the perpetuation of such, and there had been a divorce proceeding before the final settlement, that too applies to such if the children were above the ages of 18 years old when the filing had begun for the inquiry, but also a different penalty for under the age of 18. If there was intimidation used against any member of the Court of the United States of America in any portion of the House of Congress and or the House of Senate and or Supreme Court and or White House and or law enforcement branch of the United States of America, including military personnel, my recommendation is a division of 2/5 of the property to go directly to the United States of America's government in the taxes region dispensing among, and then the other 2/5 to be divided among those who had been directly manipulated and affected by such filings. If there are minor children who had been involved, who had been targeted by such filings, then the fee to them is 1.5 of the divisions of that 2/5 holdings. If in the reference of Rebecca Schrader, that aspect, because of her hypothetical willingness to travel all the way to Washington State from the state of Texas, if her, in that reference, the forfeiture of all property and possessions of any monetary value to be removed, as well as the additional of mandatory prison sentence in a minimum of a medium security federal prison if there were no threats to bodily harm for a minimum sentence of 15 years. However, if there were threats of any form of violence by her or of any of her associates in this hypothetical aspect, then the minimum sentence of 15 years is recommended to a maximum security federal prison with a minimum of 3 to 5 years in solitary confinement for each involved of the stated threats. If it is shown she had moved all ownership prior to the ruling, but after having filed paperwork with the court systems, then such is to be retrieved and forfeited with the seizure of said property. If the other individual is innocent of any crimes, for example, myself and my children, meaning my son and my daughter, then a 1/10 percentage may remain with said individual. However, if the individual was an associate of which was assisted with the crimes listed above, then the same sentence to be carried out as a recommendation. The next one. It is no secret of my Palm Sunday 2000 head injury during basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the subarachnoid hemorrhage, the coma of which I woke up from that coma at Fort Sam Houston Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, with headaches, migraines, memory deficits, cognitive disorders, and having gone from college algebra with trigonometry and calculus to second grade math, as I have written and discussed a couple of times, or maybe a few extra times, hypothetically. Even though I have discussed such details many times over throughout the years of time since waking up from the coma from the head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, I have known many people who had not believed me when I had told them of such, including my own biological family. Even though they went to the hospital at Brooke Army Medical Center, my biological mother did not believe I was in a coma or the medical after effects, even though they went to Brooke Army Medical Center at that time. Now it's San Antonio Medical Center. But nonetheless, even though she went there, she didn't believe, even though the doctors told her, she didn't believe that I had a head injury and was in a coma and all that stuff. I don't think it takes a head injury to figure out when the doctors at the hospital that I woke up from the coma at telling her that I had a head injury and was in a coma. I don't think it takes a head injury to figure out. They might know. I mean, I did not graduate from basic training and I was in a different state than my basic training was. But I don't know, maybe it does take a head injury to figure that out. Anyway. Though there were some people who believed me instantly, there were more people who did not initially, who felt they had the right wrongly to test my head injury effects without having any legal rights to, nor having any medical training through schools which they graduated after earning a degree to practice any form of medicine. Many people ignored the fact of the amount of doctors I had appointments with when it was the initial first 5 years immediately after my Palm Sunday 2000 head injury with the United States of America's Armed Forces branches of the various doctors at Fort Sam Houston, Lackland Air Force Base appointments, as well as Camp Bullis in San Antonio, Texas, or part of JBSA. Even more so, some of those same people, or cherubim ones, had ignored the amount of doctors whom I had appointments with in the civilian sector for Social Security disability on top of the military appointments that I had gone to in attempts to find any way to relieve the freaking pain I'm in, including trying to find a more holistic approach to medical care such as acupuncture, acupressure, energetic healing, MMJ, and etc. in combination after the first, well, more than 3 years for the MMJ, but the other ones, after my Palm Sunday 2000 head injury. Even still, when attempting scuba diving after finding the Israeli Medical Journal, which had findings of which scuba diving and the compression when descending and the release of certain aspects when ascending to assist people with headaches had been brought to my attention by them, they, too, as in the cherubim ones, ignored such information. Later in time, some excuses that were given to me was they had not known anyone who had been so composed while speaking, and I explained the purposes of my tattoos and haircut as well as hair color, which assisted me, and does assist me, As usually, I was at a location of which more than one of my tattoos were showing at the time before the ones that are on my... There are more. Between the years of 2000 through 2007. I had gone through to more than 30 doctor appointments at Brooke Army Medical Center at Fort Sam Houston, more than 70 appointments at Wilford Hall at Lackland Air Force Base, and more than 25 appointments at the medical areas at Camp Bullis. I don't know, does it take a head injury to figure out? It's a lot of doctors to be able to go through my medical stuff to try to help me with my... The amount of doctor appointments through SSI had been a minimum of every 3 to 5, had been a minimum of 3 to 5 appointments every 5 to 6 months for the first 3 years, and the subsequent years after were either 6 to 8 months apart before being yearly checkups to then randomly report paperwork because of the lack of need to waste the time of anyone because of the combination of doctor appointments that had gone on, the reality that nothing had subsided, and then the military branches of the United States of America's Armed Forces within the civilian sector as well had proven to all of the medical professionals who actually went through medical training and studies to get degrees and certifications to actually practice medicine, and the magnitude of the medical conditions that I deal with on a daily basis in regards to the after effects from the head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. Thus, not only were those people's choices, meaning those cherubim ones' choices, to test my medical issues illegal because of not having a degree in medicine, nor a license to practice medicine, but also at a minimum, none of them were ordained through any religious organization to attempt such in a different way. That I was explained or told. Thus, multiple aspects of their choices to break various laws throughout the state of Texas, and if they chose to go to Washington State, the same aspects of breaking the laws in there, as well as if they had followed me to attempt to prove their lies in any areas of my Medal of Honor art project throughout the United States of America. If those cherubim ones had chosen to go through my medical marijuana MMJ aspects, and they chose to change the medicine I ordered, and they were not licensed to practice medicine, nor mess with my medications, even if they had a business license, as the two are completely separate from one another, and to dispense MMJ is a different license than the licenses required from a medical professional to give MMJ licenses to the patient, in this case, me. As it is known, the patient knows better, meaning I know myself better, what will work in regards to the MMJ. And thus, the people I once knew, if those cherubim ones chose to change what was ordered or have a special stash for someone like me, and they did not have a license to practice their theories on me, nor my permission to, after crossing over state lines into Washington State, again, if they had worked with a dispensary and or business of MMJ that did not give the legal right, including myself, not giving the legal right to anyone to change any of the ordered medications. And as such, even car dealerships have a law against bait and switch, known as lemon laws, for an example. However, if such hypothetically occurred to me, what they did not know is what I could do with the energy with certain plants, and which would make their attempts null and void, with the exception of adding more CBD to the mixture and the adverse reactions which would occur to the world for what would have been done because of the CBD. To regulate myself would be a major problem of which those people or cherubim ones would have to deal with the ramifications of such beyond just the initial illegalities of not having a medical license to do such, as well as the illegalities of lying to the United States of America's government. In turn, I have some hypothetical questions for such if certain aspects were to have occurred, as well as some suggestions if there are no legal precedents for such, to give a few ideas to the lawmakers of the United States of America, who obviously know far better how to write laws to assist with such. If such occurred and my pain levels were made to be worse for what I already deal with, for example, where I once was able to tolerate the hair on the side of my head touching my ears, but now since I have to get used to that area being waxed and the weight of my hair, because of what occurred in Washington State, as well as taking into the account the altitude changes, what would the legal ramifications of such be? If such hypothetically occurred and the medication I had purchased had been tampered with, as well as the medication I had been prescribed to through the doctors, if I had to hypothetically work with the energies to make better for myself to better tolerate the areas and locations I was in, what are the ramifications of such for my justice for me? If such occurred and the ways I had to unknowingly prove myself to be innocent because of unknowingly being targeted even further, and the aspects that had caused damage and or harm further to my son and my daughter, what are the ramifications for them? Regarding the aspects thereafter of what I refer to in prior points for the references for recommendations to be investigated for further aspects. While the MMJ, or medical marijuana, has not fully been decriminalized as of this moment federally, the fact I did not use such for recreational purposes is, as I guesstimate and hope, well known. Thus, because even though not to the same level as some might view as prescription medications, but because of the fact I had been able to benefit from, knew how to energetically ensure such for myself, that does not discount the fact of tampering with the medications and what I had to do to ensure my own safety, as well as the safety of those around me, but especially the safety for my son, James Michael, as well as in reference to regards for my daughter, Lydia Louise. Thus, the same type of penalties already stated in reference to the prescription medication tampering I had recommended for this in regards to MMJ for myself and for those who also may have had such occur in reference. And though I do not like acknowledging the fact that MMJ has assisted me because of the stereotypes, I also cannot deny that it has been helpful. Not the CBD, not the terpenes, the THC has actually been far more beneficial. I cannot be the only one who has seen such benefits. I made recommendations in my first book, Finding a Silver Lining, in reference to that. And I do have ideas and suggestions beyond what I have discussed and written about in reference to THC for assisting those who have similar medical conditions that I deal with or medical complications because of having a head injury. I also have ideas for plant aspects beyond the strains that are currently in use of and knowledge of. And whoever it was that stole those gladiola plants that I got to grow in San Antonio, Texas, would be able to verify, number one, that I got gladiolas to grow in the ground in the state of Texas, in San Antonio specific, because of the type of soil I got those to grow. You did not have the right to take my plants. Could have at least asked, and not a section here and here. But as an example for what I know how to do with plants and how to get them to grow. I do have recommendations for such. A contract would be pretty cool. I have a few ideas for different strains on how to make that a more permanent thing instead, because those bi and tricolor plants that I made, because I had not purchased them, as well as making them multi-petaled for the gladiolas, without actually, just knew how to make them that way. and in colors that you cannot replicate because of the genetic traits. I have some ideas. And I still have not seen the gladiola flowers that I made that were taken from my yard that were in the rainbow color. Because there was, that was taken, one stalk that had been red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple in that gladiola. And no, you cannot replicate that. Although I'm sure that that has been attempted. It's a thing I can do. Anyway, I actually changed the color of a rose, just one, in the rose bushes in the apartment complex. As a hypothetical example, if that was seen. Because all of the rest of the roses on that bush, bright red, and got one to be a extremely light pink. Did that all by myself. Not to toot my own horn, I just did it all by myself, and only to one. Because I know how to do it. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Please subscribe to my channel. Go to my website, www.susanmeeling.com. There will be the links for where you can purchase the book, the modern day book. That's how you spell my name, for my website. And there's my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, as well as other stuff I've done. So, thanks for tuning in.